Hi, this is Genevieve Douglas, a reporter with Bloomberg Law, and I'm here at the Littler Executive Employer Conference, where I have two Littler attorneys joining me to discuss the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union. Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
We have Phil Gordon, who is shareholder and co-chair of the Privacy and Background Checks Practice Group, and we have Don Dowling, who's a shareholder.
Hello.
So May 25th is fast approaching. I want to quickly get into the European Union's data protection regulation and what US companies need to know. So first, there is an update to the geographic scope of the rule. Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Sure. So I think there's a fair amount of confusion in terms of how broad the scope is. So basically, there are three ways that a US company could get looped into GDPR.
Okay.
One is if the company has employees in the European Union or independent contractors in the European Union, it's going to need to comply. Second, for US companies that offer products or services to EU residents, for example, over the web,
Right? Oh.
they too will need to comply. Mm-hmm. And then the third bucket is companies that are service providers to EU companies and receive EU personal data, and they will be required to sign data processing agreements.
Oh, interesting.
And those agreements will require them to agree to provide GDPR-like protections for the EU personal data they receive.
Wow, so that breadth is really
It broadens the
growing and
scope.
growing. Yeah,
Yes.
and the risk of non-compliance, Don, is it can be steep.
Yes, what's getting everyone's attention is that the maximum possible penalty for a scofflaw bad offender can run up to 4% of their worldwide turnover of the company, or 10 million euros.
Wow.
Or is it 100 million? But everyone should keep that in perspective. We've had a different data protection law in place since 1998,
Right.
and there have been penalties and some stiff penalties and some high-profile cases under it. So life will go on. It's just that for the companies that are processing lots of data, the potential worst-case scenario will indeed be much, much worse.
And when we talk about what companies need to know, at even the most basic level, often many don't understand what type of data they have, whose data they have, how they're storing it, how it's being protected. Where does a US employer who thinks they might be at risk start?
Yeah, well, so I think the starting point is putting together a multidisciplinary team.
Okay.
So you're going to need HR, IT, legal, people from the business units, and do some type of inventory of structured databases where EU personal data is stored. So that could be the Human Resources Information System, the HRIS. It could be customer relationship management databases, CRMs. And then keep in mind there are all the vendors who may have personal data. And that inventory should track not just the types of data, but also where the data is located,
Right.
because that will have an impact on whether or not a data transfer mechanism needs to be put in place.
Okay. And do you get the sense, Don, that US companies are paying attention and are preparing and...
Yes, it very much depends on their, let's say, European demographics as far as, remember that this law applies to personal data, which is data about human beings, personally identifiable people. Mm-hmm. Any employer with employees in Europe has employees, and that would be part of this. Some companies would have individual customers, let's say financial services, where people with credit card holders or bank account holders, you'd have lots and lots of personal data in Europe. Another company, though, would be on the other end of that spectrum and maybe has just a couple of employees in Europe without much personal data about customers.
Okay.
So there'd be a whole range, but at the high end of the range, the providers of internet and social media services, for example, with all their customers, that it's a huge issue.
Sounds like they're going to have to start doing their homework. So
Well, they've been doing it. They're not.
That's good.
The law comes in on May 25,
Right.
but there's been a ramp-up period.
Okay, good. Well, thank you both so much for
Thank you
this
so much.
discussion, and I can't wait to keep it going.
Thank you,
you.
Genevieve.
Thank you.